What if Doctor Who wasn't axed in 1989? Since 2016, I've been exploring this concept, creating a detailed and rich alternate timeline, following each decision to the next through cause and effect, as well as a lot, and I mean a lot, of guesswork. Panopticon Series 5 would air between the 12th of May 2012 and the 14th of July 2012, starting 3 months after the release of Doctor Who Endgame, and a whole 12 months since the conclusion of Panopticon Series 4. The main reason for this was to give new series regular Juliet Landau a little time off after the filming of Doctor Who Endgame, and before that season 48, as naturally she'd be exhausted. As the original protagonist, Timothy Dalton, departed Panopticon at the end of Series 4, rival Gregory, played by Peter Capaldi, stepped up to fulfill that role. However, central character Will Adams would take a larger role this season, but he still wouldn't be the protagonist. The main cast would have mainly stayed the same. Gregory, Will, Kendra, Cordell and Fassel would all be staying on as main characters. Zenla, as previously mentioned, would join as Gregory's new chief of staff. A recurring Series 4 character, Casten Gorgia, would become a main character. Ohelia would stay on board but in a reduced capacity as a recurring character like Frances. As Moore said, her story is pretty much done and she didn't really need to be in every episode, as her previous ties were with the Rogue, and with him gone, she was only Will's surrogate mother. A mother Will no longer needs, as he has matured a lot, but she still shows up every now and then this season. While Series 4 was critically quite well received, a minority of the Doctor Who fandom, a large amount but still a minority, a very vocal minority, took huge issue with the controversial rape storyline which was introduced in Series 4. A lot of these fans were very vocal and very outspoken about wanting Moore to step down just because of this storyline alone, which in fact was very much a collaboration between Moore, Espenson and Bear. However, with Moore showrunner, he was largely blamed. The team decided that perhaps they need to tone the storyline down for the next season, but still being able to offer a satisfying conclusion to the storyline. The show still remained in the 9 PM slot, despite not actually needing to be there anymore with the more family-friendly content, but was still quite grim because of Series 4 and the repercussions still reverberated in Series 5 from dealing with loose strands from that season. And because of this, Moore decided to keep that time slot. The title sequence of this series was yet again a new one. Fans and production staff alike were unhappy with the Series 4 Peter Anderson Studios titles, so after some debate with the BBC, Moore managed to get a new one commissioned from D8 Creative Agency. This sequence was more in line with the Series 1 to 3 one, but took a much darker and bleaker tone, focused on the scene of Rassilon moving as an Asheville scream representing what was happening to Gallifrey in the show. Again, because of the new titles, a new theme arrangement was made by Bear McCreary. This one took Series 4's as a base template, but then altered it to fit the new titles. It was much more liked by fans than Series 4's synth-heavy, dark, twisted one, as this one was more sort of piano-based with still those synths in the background. The behind-the-scenes staff would have stayed mostly the same, with Ronald D. Moore as chief executive producer and Jane Espenson as his second-in-command chief staff writer, credited as a co-executive producer. Again, Ivor Stephen Bear and Faith Penhill were the other executive producers, as Gary Russell was no longer the producer of Doctor Who, as there wasn't any Doctor Who on. He was no longer executive producer. Also, Phil Collinson would step down after Series 4, and new producer Brian Minchin would take over from him for Series 5. However, because of Doctor Who Endgame, there was a big change story-wise to Gallifreyan society. Because in Doctor Who Endgame, the Hive Harmony imploded, which had a massive knock-on effect to Panopticon, as Time Lords no longer had the ability to travel through time, as there was no Eye of Harmony powering their TARDISes, and they could only travel through space, still in their TARDISes, but they could not travel through time. The consequences of this would be explored throughout the season, not in any massive storylines or anything, but it would still be there. They're not able to travel through time at all. 100 days ago, Grigori became Lord President of Gallifrey. 100 days ago, a war which he did not want to fight began. 100 days ago, Gallifrey became a police state. 100 days ago, Grigori started having nightmares. Nightmares which trouble him because he believes they show the future that awaits him. This episode opens the season by jumping 100 days ahead of Series 4's finale. We begin with a dream sequence, and it's obvious that we are seeing it from Grigori's point of view. His vision is blurred, a silhouette of a tall woman towering over him is blurred, and the muffled sound of her speaking at him echoes. We hear Grigori whimpering, and he says over and over again, "Have it, it's yours, I surrender." Then Grigori wakes up in his bed, sweating and hyperventilating. He goes to his bedside cabinet and picks up a glass of water and drinks it. He mops his brow and sighs. Then we cut to the titles. We then pick up presumably the next day. Grigori is in a meeting of the High Council, and he explains that his new Chief of Staff, Zenla, shall be arriving this afternoon replacing Fassel, who was acting as interim Chief of Staff as well as Vice President. We are also brought up to speed as an audience, but through dialogue, about the latest, rather fascist laws introduced on Gallifrey. The outsiders, with the exception of any currently in the Academy, which includes Kendra, so she's safe, have been separated in a settlement in Lexivore, which has been created just for them, where all outsiders must go. They're pretty much left alone there, but they're not allowed to leave or enter any other cities. In addition, a curfew has been introduced for all Time Lords, unless they have a warrant, and the termination penalty has been brought back into common use. They explain that Drama Vinci has tried to block many of these laws, but Grigori has infiltrated and redesigned the Panopticon, filling it with his supporters, which has entirely decimated the opposition. We then focus on Will. In his quarters within the Citadel, he sat on his settee looking at a photograph, his only photograph, a photograph of him and Belinda, his girlfriend before he was abducted by the rogue. He looks at it deeply, reminiscing about the past and how much he misses it. Then he hears an alarm. He stands up alert, turns it off, and quickly puts down the photo, and leaves his quarters, muttering to himself, "I'm going to be late." We cut to the Academy, the main halls, and on the stage are about a dozen students, soon to newly be Time Lords. One of them is Kendra. Will enters the hall and finds a seat in the audience. He looks at Kendra, and Kendra looks back at him and smiles. We then see Kendra become officially a Time Lady, as she goes through the lengthy graduation process. Afterwards, Will goes to meet Kendra and puts his arm around her, and they kiss. It's here that we find out that in the past 100 days they finally got their act together and got together. However, as we know from earlier, Will still feels guilty, and is still missing Belinda, his girlfriend. We then go back to Grigori and the High Council. They all walk into the empty Panopticon, awaiting the arrival of Zenla, who is scheduled to arrive in the Doctor's TARDIS at this time. The TARDIS lands, and out steps Zenla. She greets everyone, and also says that under the last will and testament of the former Lord President, the Doctor, who Grigori only knows as the former Lord President who has just died, and not personally as his memory was erased. The Doctor's TARDIS from now on will go on display in the entrance hall of the Panopticon in his memory. Grigori agrees, even though he has no choice, and states that Zenla is just in time as he has a speech scheduled in an hour. So for the rest of the season, the TARDIS will proudly be standing in the entrance hall every time they go through it. Then cuts to the Vex mothership, and Cordell is sat at the end of an empty council table in a dimly lit room. She scratches erratically on the table non-stop. Then we see what she's sketching into the table, and it's Grigori's desk, except instead of the silver rascal on the front is a giant V. The door opens and Elle walks in. He tells Cordell that she needs to stop doing that, and then he takes out a device and zaps a beam onto the desk, and it's wiped off. He grabs onto Cordell and takes her out of the room. He says perhaps she needs to relax a bit, revert back to her incorporeal form for a few weeks, and feel naked. Then we see Grigori's speech. He outlines that indeed the war that they voted for against his wishes is not going well. He says they need to band together and vote in favour of an unrestricted control over the way Gallifreyan armies fight the war without interference from the Alliance of Planets. Afterwards, a vote takes place and it lands in Gregori's favour. Gregori smiles and turns to Fassel and says, "Let's test this out, shall we? You got a battle to lead." Fassel asserts a look of disapproval, but does as he says, and walks off. We then follow a huge barrage of Gallifreyan ships as they travel to a far-flung solar system and meet a similar barrage of Vex ships. A space battle takes place which culminates in a large portion of the ships crashing and falling to one of the planets below. The other ships which didn't crash and weren't destroyed retreat back to their respective home worlds, leaving the battle to happen on the surface. On the planet's surface, which Fassel has also crashed onto, the battle continues one-on-one between the Time Lord soldiers and the Vex. The Time Lords are pretty much decimated and Fassel ends up knocked out, believed to us and the Vex and the Time Lords to be dead. We then cut back to Gregori as he hears of the news and wastes no time in appointing Gordra to Vice President. We then get a scene with Will and Kendra as Will decides to join up to the army and help continue the Rogue's fight, as the Rogue did want this war. Kendra tells him that it's too dangerous and not worth it, especially when he's fighting for someone like Gregori, but Will doesn't listen and decides to sign up. However, the episode ends with the battlefield, covered in bodies. A hooded figure walks through it, with a knife stabbing all the bodies to make sure they are all dead. They then reach Fassel, and he wakes up. He begs for his life, and the figure takes down the hood, and we see is Cordell. She grabs him and teleports off the planet, and then the episode ends. With Fassel presumed dead, Gordra closely allies himself with Gregori and hopes to make his position as acting vice president more permanent. Meanwhile, Fassel is very much alive on a voyage to the mysterious Vex Sphere. The episode mainly focuses on Fassel as he goes to the Vex Sphere, which as we know is in another dimension. There he meets the Council of Six, who are Ale, Cordell, Eroic, Garnet, Osmus and Pryax. However, the main issue is that some sort of virus has infected the Vex. It seems that the Council are already tearing themselves apart trying to get rid of it, as it's killing millions and millions of Vex. The Council decide to give Fassel his life in exchange for him willingly becoming a mole for them, as they send him back to Gallifrey. Reluctantly, Fassel agrees. Meanwhile, we focus on Will as he starts his training as a soldier, and we continue seeing his relationship with Kendra grow and blossom. We see Gordra's moves to keep his position as vice president, and we see Gregori continue to struggle with his nightmares. Eventually, Gregori turns to Zenna and asks for help. Zenna tries to help him with the dreams and understanding them, and she tries to help him get over them. She believes that he's feeling guilty over something he has done, and he has to let that guilt go. However, while Zenna is giving him advice, he tries to make a move on her, but before he can, Zenna slaps him in the face and gives him a good dressing down, telling him that she's his chief of staff, and not just some fluff he can play with whenever he feels like it. Zenna then storms out of his quarters and goes to her office. The cliffhanger to the episode is Fassel arriving back in Gallifrey, greeted by a bunch of guards pointing guns at him. Just as Gordra begins to score some success as the new vice president, Fassel turns up out of the blue. Unbeknownst to everyone, Fassel is operating as a spy for the Vex, and it's only a matter of time before they begin to suspect him. This episode picks up with Fassel arriving back on Gallifrey, now a Vex spy. At first, as they believed him dead, they suspect he's a Vex. However, he is checked and cleared and proven to be a Beloshian, and Gregori personally vouches for Fassel. Soon after, much to Gordra's outrage, Fassel was placed back in the role of Vice President, and Gordra returns to Castellan. The main A-plot of this episode is Gordra investigating Fassel, as he's convinced he's working for the Vex. However, no one will believe him, as they think he's just jealous as he wanted to be Vice President. The B-plot focuses on Will as he continues his training and persuades Kendra to join him, which he eventually does. Finally, the C-plot focuses on Gregori as he deals with the opposition to his new laws on the Outsiders, and smashes it apart with an iron fist. A ship arrives on Gallifrey with yet another ghost returning from the dead, Quell, one of Gregori's crewmates from the time wandering the cosmos. Unlike Fassel, Gregory knows Quell died for a fact, as she died right in his arms. But Gregory is still in love with her and refuses to suggest that she could be anything else but just Quell. This story is in a way a sequel to The Reasons and the Rhymes, and sees Gregory reunited with one of his crewmates, Quell, who we saw die in that story. Naturally, parallels are drawn up between this and Fassel's similar resurrection last episode. However, Gregory, as we know, was in love with Quell, and can't bring himself to believe that yet another one of his loves could be a spy. However, she doesn't undergo the necessary interrogations and clearances by, as customary, the Vice President, Fassel, and he, under instruction from the Vex, clears her. We mainly focus on her reconnecting with Gregory, and it's heavily applied that they do have consensual sex. And here is where Gregory realises that she's not who she says she is, because he knows that it feels different with her, that her love for him isn't real. He then comes to the conclusion that she is a Vex spy, a Vex. And she replies with, "Took you long enough." Gregory asks why she's here and why she was just going to reveal her identity so easily. And she puts her fingers on his temple and says, "Because I have to show you this, give you this warning." And we see a vision of Gallifrey, covered in flames and destruction, with the main tower of the Citadel with a giant V symbol on it. And Cordell standing on the top balcony smiling. She says, "That's a warning of what's to come unless you surrender." And then she knocks Gregory out. By the time he awakes, her ship has gone, and she presumably has returned to the Vex sphere. This story mainly focuses on Gregory and his relationship with Quell, as well as his previous relationship, in inverted commas, with Cordell. We also continue following Gorge's investigations of Fassel and Will and Kendra's training. We also spend time with Zenna as she gets to know Quell and she tries to become friends with her. William Adams, once a human, then a Shimmeron, then a Time Lord, and then a soldier. A soldier for a war that he knows they're going to lose. But he knows he's doing the right thing, or is he? Will has one last chance to back out before he steps onto the first battlefield. This episode focuses exclusively on Will, and by extension Kendra, as they both complete their training and they have to make the decision about whether or not they're going to go ahead and become soldiers. We spend the episode exploring the life of a soldier and also Will and Kendra's relationship. Eventually, they both come to the decision to go ahead with it and fight, in the Rogue's name, in Leader's name, fight and stop the Vex from taking Gallifrey. Meanwhile, we focus on Gorge's continued investigations of Fassel, but he's getting nowhere, so he asks Zenda, who is already very suspicious of Fassel herself, to help investigate him. With weeks of investigation, Gorgia and Zenna have finally enough evidence to prove Fassel is undoubtedly a Vex spy. Now Fassel must make sure that he escapes and saves his own skin. This story begins with Zenna and Gorgia presenting their case against Fassel to Gregory, detailing all of his suspicious behaviour since he arrived back in Gallifrey. Gregory is quick to act and has him immediately arrested. He's obviously hurt by yet another betrayal from one of his friends. Fassel manages to break away and goes on the run, and contacts the Vex. We then cut to the Vex sphere and we see the Council of Six debate whether or not they should help him, and all of them, apart from Cordell, vote to leave him and let him fend for himself. However, Cordell, knowing of what Gregory could do to Fassel, takes it upon herself to travel to Gallifrey in disguise and try and rescue Fassel. She finds him and reveals herself by asking him to come with her. Fassel agrees, but their escape is tough and hard, and Fassel is captured just as they are about to board the ship. Cordell leaves, knowing that he can't be rescued now. Fassel is taken into custody, and Zenna, wary of talks of Gregory's interrogation techniques, offers to take control of his interrogation. However, not before Gregory nearly flat out tells her to use some more persuasive methods. She pretends to agree, but obviously horrified, and then goes to interrogate Fassel humanely. To Gregori's dismay, Zenla has pushed for Fassel to receive a fair trial, a trial which could let him walk free or have the most severe punishment. Meanwhile, the Vex face possible extinction when the epidemic reaches breaking point. This story continues the arc about Fassel and mainly focuses on his trial. Gregory wanted to use the 34th Amendment, which allowed the Lord President to skip a trial and prosecute himself in the most severe cases. However, Zenla with the High Council pushed for a fair trial. However, Gregory, unable to control himself, then pays a visit to Andark, the director of the Order of Rassilon, and asks him to prepare initiation of Article 6. Meanwhile, we focus on the Vex Sphere with the Council of Six as they begin to combat the virus, which has infected them. Thousands of Vex are dying by the minute, and they are also devolving into their past evolutionary forms. One of them begins to regenerate, or so it looks like. However, the process isn't completed again, and they continue devolving until they reach death. All of the council manage to survive, but Osimus, who like all the rest has a slow and painful death. Back on the trial, after each case is presented, the jury decides unanimously that Fassel is guilty, and Gregory acts as the judge, sentencing him to Article 6. There is shock and horror. Those who know what Article 6 is are outraged, but Gregory's word is final, and he invites Andark with a group of agents in. They take hold of Fassel and place a device on him, and then he turns into a flicker, changing between ages constantly, old to young to old, baby to teenager, back to old, and back to young, and then they open a portal and throw him in. We then see Fassel, still flickering, fall into a time distortion, the same one from the Reasons and the Rhymes that Fassel saved Gregory from. Fassel has not only been killed, but all of his life after his first mate Gregory has been erased, only to be remembered by Time Lords, as Article 6 doesn't affect them. Also in this episode, the new Castellan, as Gordra is now Vice President permanently, Rodan is introduced. Rodan was previously a character seen in The Invasion of Time, but here she's played by Miranda Rayson as a new regular in this season and going forward. The Vex are in chaos. The virus is killing everyone and fast. If their plans are to succeed, they need help. Help from someone they really didn't want to ask for it from. This episode entirely takes place on the Vex Sphere and from the point of view of Cordell, with her as the main character. The only appearance from our other main characters justifying sorta their credits in it are pictures of them on the monitors in the Vex Sphere. The episode runs in real time, set in the Vex Council room in their emergency meeting about the virus. Eventually, after getting worse and worse and worse, they vote to bring in the Hell, against Elle and the new Osimus, played by Christopher Eccleston's, wishes. Note, the name of the Vex Councillors aren't their actual names. Osimus is the name of the region they represent. Cordell is, Aeon is, etc. They're referred to by the name of the region in the Vex Sphere that they represent. The Hell is essentially the Vex version of Rassilon. She's an ancient figure who is more powerful than any other but immensely dangerous and unstable. They revive her and she uses her powers to extract the whole virus from every single Vex and place it into another, which would instantly kill the Vex. The council have to decide who to sacrifice. They vote preferentially, and the votes are tallied up and Cordell is chosen. However, the Hell stops them and says she's vital to their plan and she cannot be used. Much to the detriment of everyone else, the second place is taken and Priex is sacrificed. In a big sequence, we see the virus enter her body and then explodes. The Hell then says, "Now we've got that out of the way, let's go and retake our home, Gallifrey." And then the episode ends. The invasion of Gallifrey is imminent, and the only chances of the Time Lords stopping the invasion lies with the combined force of the Alliance. However, Drama Vinci wants Gallifrey removed from the Alliance as she cannot risk it invaded too. It's a sacrifice she's willing to take. Gallifrey. This episode features the return of Drama Vinci, the Prime Minister of the Alliance of Planets, as she doesn't feel that it's safe for the Alliance if Gallifrey continues as a member. Gregory, of course, is furious as the Alliance is Gallifrey's only chance of survival, as the war began on the condition that the Alliance's combined force fought the Vex and not just Gallifrey on its own. Drama Vinci presents the proposal to the Panopticon, which has already been voted on by the Alliance's Senate in her favour. She says that even though it's going to happen, she wants Gallifrey to be on her side, so she feels confident in it, and asks for a vote to go ahead in the Panopticon so he can use it as a guide for a final executive decision. The vote goes ahead, and despite Gregory whipping up the votes, they vote 51.23% for Gallifrey's suspension. Gregory's furious and throws a tantrum in the Panopticon, shouting and screaming at them, calling them all sorts of names. He breaks down and shouts over and over again. And then we cut to the Vex Sphere, and the Council look at the screen in joy. The House says, everything is falling into place, send the ships, we're beginning the invasion right now. And the episode ends on that cliffhanger. The Vex have begun their invasion. It's everything or nothing. Gallifrey is on their own and must fight. Fight for their freedom. Fight for their lives. Time is ticking, and all that is coming is fire and fury. This episode is for the most part a big action scene. Lots of fighting. We see Will and Cantor in action. We see Gregory get hands on. We see lots of Vex fighting, using their psychic powers to trick people. Gallifrey falls into ruin in this episode. The citadel is smashed, buildings destroyed, flames everywhere. Plenty of people die, including but not limited to Ahelia, Runish, Valana, Torzel, Goldoff and Hilvala. Gordra only survives through the fact that he went down into the bunker with Gregory after the first 20 minutes of the battle. Towards the end of the episode, the Vex storm the bunker and Gordra hides, but Gregory faces them, and through the smoke, Cordell walks through the door like a phantom. She has a gun held up to his head, and Gregory gulps. He realises that this is the vision he saw in his dreams. It was this moment. Gregory asks Cordell why they are doing this. What is it that the Vex wants? And a voice sounds from behind her. It's the Howl. The Howl walks into the bunker and explains. I've been here before, this bunker. Sort of. There's one like it back home, the Vex Sphere, in our dimension. It used to be known by another name. Gallifrey. We see Gregory, shock and horror on his face. We were once you. I was once a Time Lord. Someone called... Oh yes, I forget sometimes. The Rani. However, then they came and saved us. During the war with the Resistance, the Vardens came, and unlike in your dimension, the Alliance worked, we joined, and both ascended together. To the next stage of evolution, the Vex. The Vex form a complete, incorporeal form. We only become physical when needed. Now, we want to extend that kindness that the Vardens gave us all of those years ago. We want every dimension, every planet to ascend to the Vex form. The next stage of evolution, starting with Gallifrey. Will you let us do that, Lord President? Gregory gulps. The Howl and Cordell both intensely stare at him, with blank smiles on their faces. Gregory eventually speaks up. No. The Howl takes the gun and holds it up to his temple and softly speaks, surrender or die. Gregory then gives a big speech explaining why he's not going to surrender and ends with, die. The Howl is about to pull the trigger when she hands the gun to Cordell and tells it it's better if she did it. Cordell smiles, takes the gun, and then shoots Gregory in the head, disintegrating him into 1,000 pieces. They both stand over the ruin of his once body, and link arms as they walk out the bunker. Through the battle-worn citadel, smiling. They make their way to Gregory's office and look out the window at the scarred planet ahead. The Howl steps forward and screams, Welcome to the new home of the Vex! The camera pulls back out the window to reveal the broken and destroyed citadel, and then back up through the atmosphere, out of the planet to the dead vacuum of space. Then the episode, and thus the series, ends. So that's Series 5 of Panopticon. I'll let that sink in for a moment. Gallifrey is now under new management, I guess, again. What will happen next time? You'll have to wait and see, but I can tell you one thing about 2013. Not only would the 50th anniversary film be released, not only would the second series of Cold Front air, not only would Panopticon Series 6 air, but also its final series, Series 7, would also air in 2013, with Series 6 in the first half of the year and 7 in the second. But that's still a few months away. Next time is Cold Front Series 1, and no, I'm not telling you what it's about yet. Until then, goodbye.